If you could go back in time, who would you want to meet? In a small back alley in Tokyo, there's a cafe that's been serving carefully brewed coffee for more than 100 years. Local legend says that this shop offers something else besides coffee, the chance to travel back in time. Over the course of one summer, 4 customers visit the cafe in hopes of making that journey. But time travel isn't so simple, and there are rules that must be followed. Most important, the trip can last only as long as it takes for the coffee to get cold. What would you change if you could travel back in time?
It's Halloween, ladies and gentlemen, which means it's time to talk about a spooky story. Did I read anything that was horror related? No. But there was a ghost in it, so I feel like that counts. Welcome back to Reading as Writers, where we learn how to be bigger, better, clever writers, one book at a time, and today, Under the Microscope, we have Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. If I said that name wrong, apologies. So, this story. Exactly, Echo. I rated this story 5 stars. My opinion has slightly changed, not enough to take away a star, but my opinion of it has slightly changed over the course of just sitting with the story, reading some of the more critical reviews about it. I had a fun time. I'm not actually a hard reader to please. It's easy to get a 5-star out of me. This was a great time. So what is Before the Coffee Gets Cold? This is a short story collection of interwoven stories that all take place at this coffee shop called Funicula in Tokyo, Japan. This is this basement cafe where time feels very distorted, the lights make it look very sepia, and there is a ghost that sits in one of these chairs. And if you sit in the chair that the ghost is sitting in, you can go back in time and interact with people from the past. Bah. So this is a very interesting setup. So because this is a short story collection, it's interwoven, but it is still a short story collection. I'm gonna have to tell you, as I go through this summary, I'm gonna be telling you basically 4 different stories. Number 1. By the way, I think I have 30 pages of 30 pages of notes. Most of 8 of it is here, and the rest of it is in my notebook. Ooh, there's a cat there. So, I got lots to say. So our first time traveler is Fumiko. Her boyfriend Goro brings her to the cafe to break up with her because he got this job in America. Fumiko is very annoyed with all of these rules that she has to follow in order to go back in time, and she even gets cursed by the ghost when she attempts to cheat at the rules, but she gets better. Just a little curse. No big deal. But she ultimately manages to go back in time and to confess to her boyfriend that she wished that he didn't go, and then he talks about how he felt very unworthy of her, and it just seems that these two people needed to communicate, but they're very much like young lovers in their 20s. And at the end, he says, I'll be back in 3 years. So that's what the first story is about. It's basically this love story. The second story, our time traveler, her name is Kotake. Fumiko was the time traveler in the first one. Now we're talking about Kotake. We've already met her husband, Fusagi, in the first story. He serves as sort of a problem that Fumiko needs to conquer because he also wants to go back in time, and he got there first, and Fumiko doesn't want to be rude and say, no, I want to go first. So Fusagi's a bit of a problem for Fumiko in story 1, but he doesn't end up going back in time. And then in story 2, we get to learn more about him. We learn that he wants to give a letter to his wife, but in the second story, we learn that the nurse, Kotake, the time traveler, is his wife, and he doesn't remember her because he has Alzheimer's and he's losing his memory. His wife is a regular at the coffee shop, and on this day, it's significant because Fusagi has completely forgotten who Kotaki is. He didn't recognize her at all. And Kotaki, with her very caring nature as a nurse, she's like, I can live with him only seeing me as his nurse, completely forgetting him as his wife. If I have to take care of him this way, that's how I'll do it. I'm not happy about it, but that's what I have to do. And because she has the opportunity to go back in time, Kotake does, in order to get the letter. So in the first story, Fusagi had a letter that he wanted to give her, and in the second story, Kotake decides to go back in time to a point where Fusagi had his memory and had the letter so that he could give her the letter. I think it's because one of the waitresses thinks it's a love letter, but he gives her the letter. Kotake gets the letter. He's actually aware that Kotake is time traveling, which was wild, but effectively the letter is like, I know I have Alzheimer's. I know I'm losing my memory. I know that once it's gone, that you're just gonna live as my nurse and pretend that we weren't married. I don't want that. Either keep fighting for us even as my memory fails and stay with me as my wife, or I want you to leave me and go find happiness with somebody else. So Kotake is given a choice. And she decides that she, who very dedicated to her husband, she wants to keep insisting that she is his wife and stay with him. She chooses to stay. It's very romantic. We love it here. In the third story, the time traveler is the other regular at the coffee shop, Hirai. She's known for wearing bright colors and curlers in her hair and running her like late night snack bar. I don't know what that is. I assume that if you're from Japan, you know what that is. Is it just a a street vendor? It sounds like a street vendor to me, but it also kind of sounds like a bar that also serves snacks. I don't know what this is. Let me know what it is, if you know what it is. So Hirai, she left home after a disagreement with her parents that left her disinherited from the family inn, and now Hirai's little sister Kumi is the one who will inherit the inn and run the inn and take care of it herself. Kumi drives down to Tokyo about once a month to convince Hirai to come home. And Hirai at this point, she just starts avoiding Kumi because she doesn't want to talk to her. Because Hirai's like, oh, Kumi's just mad that now she has to run the inn and her dreams got dashed because I got disinherited. So now she's just keep trying to rope me back in, and I'm tired of this conversation. So Hirai just keeps avoiding Kumi. On Kumi's way back this last time, Kumi dies in a traffic accident. And so Hirai decides that she's going to go back in time to talk to Kumi to get some closure. And Hirai is basically like, I'll run the bar with you. And Kumi gets very excited and she's like, my dreams are finally coming true. And Hirai's like, okay, fine. She died for this. What is your dream? What did you want? I can't change the fact that you died, but at least I can know what dream you wanted to pursue. And Kumi says that her dream was to run the inn with Hirai. She just wanted to run it together as sisters. It's very sad. It's very emotional. And Hirai decides to, after going back, after she's done in the past and coming back into the present, she decides that she's going to go home and take over the inn and do what they should have done together. So it's very sweet. The fourth story, our time traveler is the co-owner, the coffee shop owner's wife, and a waitress, Kay. Instead of going to the past, she goes to the future. She was born with a heart condition, she's become pregnant, and it becomes clear that she won't survive the pregnancy. Instead of exploring other options, she decides to have the baby, and she takes her turn in the seat to go to the future to meet the child. She is sad that the only thing she can really do is bring this child into the world, but her daughter, Miki, shares this very touching moment that brings Kay peace. And then we end the story basically on the birth of Miki and this conversation about how, sometimes all what we do is we pour coffee. It's a very, very slice of life kind of ending. So that's just what happens. Again, this is 4 short stories, so that's a lot of lore to catch up on. So if you are ever confused, feel free to come back to this section to get a refresher. Alright, so there are some things we have to go over before we actually start talking about the things that worked and didn't work in this novel. This is a translated text. It was originally written in Japanese. I think that R.F. Kuang said it best in her book Babel that translations are like a betrayal or an assassination. You always lose something when we go from one language to the other. Thus, when you read this novel, I would implore you to have just a little bit more patience because of the fact that it's translated. And because this book is overseas for me, and it might also be for you, we have to understand the cultural environment of Japan. The cultural environment of Japan, it is not mine, and if you're not from Japan, it's also not yours. Our histories are different, which means the things that we value and we write about will also be different. You can't read this book with your American values in mind, for example, for me. Otherwise, parts of these books you might not enjoy. So, with that being said, let's talk about Japanese literature. The most influential foreign culture on Japanese literature up until like 1800s to the 1900s was China. That makes sense. To the mid 19th century, we started seeing Western influences on Japanese literature, and originally Japanese literature was written in Chinese, but Chinese all the characters, there weren't enough of them to get all of the sounds that existed in Japanese, and so that's where kana sort of came in, and it kana became very integral to how Japan expressed written thought and emotion. So this is a part of our translation assassination. It's going to be the fact that we are reading this with the Phoenician alphabet and not a Japanese script. I have no idea what these differences could be. I have no idea how to read Japanese, but that is something you must think of when you're going into a translated text. Traditional Japanese literature is interested in themes of loyalty, obligation, self-sacrifice, and it's usually connected in some way with the supernatural. Before the Coffee Gets Cold has basically all of that. I would say this book was written in the style of like traditional Japanese literature. Modern Japanese literature is entrenched in rebellion from traditionalism and capitalism. It's very much what we're seeing today in the modern writing sphere in America, the modern writing sphere in Japan and America right now. They're very, very similar. They're both tackling the same thing, and that's probably because at this point in time, globalism has allowed a more equal distribution of information and ideas and concepts. Going into this, it's going to feel conservative because this feels like it was written with traditional Japanese literature sentiments in mind. This is the equivalent of somebody writing a story in modernism in the way that modernism existed in the 1920s, rather than like a more modern version of modernism. Neo-modernism? Words, man. The seasons are also very important in Japanese literature and in Japanese poetry. They have a whole dictionary called Kigo, which describes the seasons, most of which I assume is again lost in translation. I have no idea if those words were included in this text because again we're using the Phoenician alphabet, we're using English, we're not using Japanese. I think that there are parts that are going to feel very antiquated or old-fashioned, critics have pointed out, and I would agree. Some of this is very this was the soul of this book feel like it was written for a different era. So if you are looking for like a Japanese written book that is sharing some of the modern sentiments that we are seeing in American literature, this is not the book. This is a very cozy, very old soul book. This book wears a fedora and calls someone milady. And somehow they get away with it. Most people don't, but this book gets away with it. So when minimalism is done wrong, people will say that the writing is boring, bland, it tells, it doesn't show. We'll see in the criticisms of this book that it has been described as very flat or uninteresting, or that it describes everything, nothing is ever very shown. And again, these are valid criticisms. I've come to learn that people tend to shy away from some of the more stylized literary movements because they don't find them very entertaining. And that's fair. I generally do not read any books published before 1950 because the specific literary movements at the time are just, they're hard for me to understand. I never have any fun reading them, so I just stay away. Technically it's a window. I tip everything from like the 13th century to 1950 I don't read, because I do read ancient religious texts and I don't have a problem with those, but I'm also reading modern translations of those ancient texts. So I'm still kind of technically in the window of 1950s into the present is sort of my zone. Everyone has tastes, and people are going to rate this book low, even though I would argue that it's good writing. It's just a stylized writing that might not jive with you. The minimalism is why people would think that this story is garbage, and I think that if you're gonna rate a book low for that, that's perfectly fine. I've rated books low for reading them because the genre and the style just simply weren't for me. Does that feel a little unfair to the author? Yeah. You wrote a good novel in a genre someone doesn't like, and now you have to deal with a bad review of it. Does it matter? No. Some people like minimalism. You can't cater to everyone. Go pick any 5 books and look at the reviews, and you'll see that the negative reviews all generally say the same thing. I mean, the positive reviews also all generally say the same thing, but this is why reviews are helpful, but at the same time, they're also not helpful, because books are all about taste, and the same person who will say this book is trash will the next person will say this book was genius. And both of those critiques are valid because it's a matter of taste. And I'm sure that we can argue that, like, some books are objectively better than other books, but I don't really care about objectivity in art. Subjectively, all books are both good and bad until a person reads them. It's Schrodinger's book. I think this is the second time I have brought up quantum physics in my book reviews, and I've only made 2. Superposition. I couldn't think of the word. Superposition. So what is minimalism? You might be asking. What is this magical word? So, according to Masterclass, minimalism is characterized by 3 things. Number 1, short sentences. The simple sentence is a short king in minimalism. In school, I learned this as the Hemingway and, where Ernest Hemingway would list things and put the word and in between them for sort of a dramatic effect. So, for example, she used lilies and the chrysanthemums and the daffodils for the flower crown. Or, all he saw was collapsed buildings and cracked roads and death. It's my favorite thing to come out of minimalism. It's such a clever trick of creating movement and depth with as very few words as possible. I absolutely love it. Second thing, less is more. The writing is short and direct with few adverbs and few adjectives. The lack of complexity is where the interpretation is born. So a lot of people in the critical side of this is going to be like, they say everything. There's no emotion, there's no descriptions. It's because this is minimalism. It's going to be short and direct and sweet and to the point. And 3, simplistic premise. The plot is simple, so you can follow the characters and really get to know them and evaluate their character development. So the short stories, just the genre in general of short stories, have to borrow from minimalism because time is of the essence. You only have so many words to get this story done. So I can't say for sure if the minimalism in Before the Coffee Gets Cold was intentional or a product of Kawaguchi writing short stories. But either way, it worked for me. I really loved it. Each short story and the overarching plot for it is incredibly simple. The first one is just a woman regretting the breakup that she had. The second one is a woman with her husband with Alzheimer's and trying to navigate that. The third one is about a sister dying in a car crash. And the fourth one is about a mother dying in childbirth and wanting to meet her unborn child. These are all very simple, easy to pick up premises. There's nothing complex about them. But it allows us to really grow and understand the nuances of the characters, because we're not really focusing on how the plot works. The plot is very basic. We are now focusing on really how the characters feel in those moments. Minimalism, it's a flavor, and it's not everyone's flavor. It's my flavor, but it's not everyone's. This is also the second Japanese author that I've read, and the style is very similar. I'm wondering if minimalism is just a part of traditional Japanese literature. I'm not entirely sure, but that's just what I've observed, that Shusaku Endo and Toshikazu Kawaguchi have very similar writing styles. In order to avoid Deus Ex Machina, or feeling like stories were too convenient to feel comfortable with, you have to plant things ahead of time. If you need a gun to go off in Act 3, you have to plant it in Act 1. This is basically the reverse of Chekhov's gun. He basically says that every detail in a book has to be important, and if it's not important, take it out. So planting or seeding, it helps us establish a level of familiarity, so that way when we see something again, it doesn't feel like it came out of nowhere. When I watch movies, I call it gun hunting, where I'm actively searching for all of the stuff they're planting to go off later in the third act, and sometimes it's an actual gun, and that's cool. Bullet Train was great. I was holding on to that one for like an hour. In Don't Worry, Darling, Alice hums a song, and she doesn't understand what it is. And later we find out that Jack sings this song to her out in the real world. And so Alice singing it up until that point to the reveal, that's planting. That's the planted gun. And then in Knives Out, I believe it's the grandfather who's like, you couldn't tell the difference between a fake knife and a real knife. And then later, when it matters most, the one guy, he goes to stab someone and it's the fake knife. The grandfather saying you wouldn't tell the difference between the fake or the real knife, that's a planted gun. Or a planted knife. In Before the Coffee Gets Cold, one of the things that I'm like, this book was so genius and I absolutely loved it, is that you know who the next story is going to be about, because they are planted in the one that precedes it. Thus, we feel like the cafe is always familiar, because we've already met the people who are going to be going in time. With short stories, short story collections, part of the sadness of it is that we have to move on to the next story with new people and new faces. But Before the Coffee Gets Cold gets around that, because we keep it into the cafe, and we are never springing entirely new characters out of the blue when the new story starts. We're always pulling something from the story before. It generates this circular water wheel level of familiarity. So in story 1, which is about Fumiko and Goro, the young lovers, in that story is Fusagi. And I think Kotake is in there. I can't remember if Kotake is there, but Fusagi absolutely is. He's seen as just another man in this cafe. He's looking to go back in time, and Fumiko is angry because he got there first and she doesn't want to wait, but he ends up not going and he leaves, and we learn that he wants to give a letter to his wife. Then when we go into the second story, Kotake is the one who travels in time, but it's all about Fusagi. He was already there in the first story, though. And then in the second story, with Kotake and Fusagi and the Alzheimer's narrative, we meet Kumi. Kumi comes to visit the cafe. She's looking for her sister Hira. Hira is avoiding her. There's a conversation that's had and a letter that changes hands, and then Kumi leaves. And when Kumi leaves, very later that day, she gets in her car accident. So when we get to story 3, we hear about the car accident, and now Hirai is the person in the time traveler's seat. But before we even get there, that story opens up with somebody time traveling to the cafe. It's Mickey, and Mickey wants a photo with Kay. Mickey takes the photo with Kay, They disappear. We learn Kay is pregnant in story 3. All the while, we are entrenched in this narrative about Hirai and Kumi. And then, when we get to the 4th story, it's about Kay. And Kay wants to go into the future to talk with her unborn daughter because she knows she's going to die in childbirth. Who's that daughter? It's Mickey, the girl who was time traveling in the story before. So each story, the next story is seated in the first story, and it's just so genius. And it felt really rewarding to notice it and be able to pick it up and be able to sort of predict where we were going next. And again, it kept this this story, it kept feeling familiar. We never felt like we were in unfamiliar territory in the way that normal short story collections would be, because every time it's a new set of characters and a new set of a problem, and you have to leave the ones behind, but we don't have that here. It's very genius, it's very clever, it's very good. And in terms of a learning thing, right? Because we're here to learn. This is what this is. I'm trying to create this massive database of books to case study so that writers can really read as writers. That's my goal. So in terms of educational purposes, the minimalism makes this planting easier to see. So if you're confused, like, how do I plant well, this book is very, very easy and very approachable. So if you're struggling with planting, read this book. Watch the way that Kawaguchi introduces the protagonists of the next story. So this is a short story collection. It's a very good short story collection. We've got 3 flavors. I really do like lists. Lists are easy and approachable. We've got 3 flavors of short story that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm sure that there are probably more flavors, but these are the only ones that I am kind of aware of. So we have the anthology, which is short stories, nothing in common from one to the next one. They have nothing in common with character, with location, with theme. Sometimes even authors. So they're just an anthology. It's just a collection. There's no real connectivity between any of them. The next one, which is the one that you're going to see most often, are thematic short story collections. These are short stories that often have nothing to do with each other. 1 or 2 might reference each other, but for the most part, they don't have anything to do with each other, but they have a common theme. So 10th of December by George Saunders? I think it's George Saunders. I'm gonna feel like a silly girl if I'm wrong. Is your name George Saunders? Yeah. It's George Saunders. Okay, I only read 1 story in here for class. I should read the rest of it. So 10th of December by George Saunders, and Interpreters of Maladies by Jumti Lottery, I think is how you say her name. I don't actually know. I'm so sorry, but Interpreter of Maladies is another example of thematic short story collections. I haven't read all of 10th of December, so like I'm vaguely aware of what the themes are, but Interpreter of Maladies is all about India. And then we have our 3rd flavor of short story, which is interwoven. These are short stories that are connected both within plot and in theme. How high we go in the dark, the things they carried, before the coffee gets cold. These are all examples of interwoven short story collection. I had to do a writing project in high school in the style of the things they carried. It was called A Heart in the Right Place, and I wrote about my brother and his Down syndrome and his heart conditions and all of the chaos that went into keeping my brother alive for those first, 5 to 10 years. It was intense. So I feel more confident about talking about interwoven short story collections because I read them, I've written them, we're here. So we should mention here that this book was adapted from a play. So the format, you're going to look at this and you go, oh yeah, I can see how this came from a play, because we never leave the coffee shop. The story takes place entirely in this coffee shop, and we only go back in time, leave the coffee shop in flashbacks. That's the only time we leave. Flashbacks. Wait. I've heard that before. in the cafe and you only go back in flashback. Oh no, it's a narrative constant in Before the Coffee Goes Cold that we never actually leave the cafe. So that's the thing that interweaves all of our stories. Then, because of the rules and the general apathy that the public has about the time traveling, our cast is very small. And it stays small. It's a very clever way to do it. Our story is told about the couple who ends up there by accident because the cafe they usually go to is closed, two regulars, and then one of the owners. Those are the people who are going back in time. We cannot escape the connectivity of this story because the setting and the narrative demand it. And Kawaguchi leans into it and it works. It's great. There are 3 more books. So I'm not sure how I will feel about the rest of them. This book did not feel very sequel worthy because we had a short story about one of the coffee shop owners, one of the two owners, and that had a level of finality to it. So we'll see. I loved this book, so I will end up reading the rest of them. I'm not sure how I'm gonna feel about them. It might be how I felt about oh god, what is the name of the book? Is it The World We Live In? The World We Live In is one of them. It's the one where the moon gets hit by the meteor and it throws everything out of pocket. Like the rest of the books they don't really hold a candle to the first one, but like I liked them because I really liked the first one. Life as We Knew It. There we go. Life as We Knew It. So I'm like, yeah, the rest of those Life as We Knew It and The Giver, where the rest of their books are like, they're absolutely not as good as the first, but if you were like super into the first one, then you'll somewhat enjoy the rest of them. By the way, The Giver is not a standalone. It's a quartet. You don't need to read all 4, just read Giver and Son. Trust me, as someone who read Giver and then Son, you don't need the middle two, I promise. So, narrative constants are the rules, both literal and thematic, that the world is operating under. The reader doesn't always need to have these rules stated explicitly, but the world needs to know what the rules are because the world is operating under them. I do call them rules, but rules really is a generous term. These are constants, the things that have to remain true in order for the story to just make sense. When narrative constants are broken, it should be drastically changing the direction of the story. And often, the inciting incident usually is the breakage of one of these narrative constants, right? Something has to change about the world state in order for a plot to begin. Something has to happen. When we flippantly break narrative constants and we're just like breaking them left and right for funsies, the world logic breaks down. And then when the world logic starts to break down, then the world starts to feel very arbitrary and fictional. The suspension of disbelief is cut. People aren't in it anymore. We're aware that it is a story being told. Things feel forced and out of place. Audience reactions vary. Some will still buy into it. That's the constant. That's the narrative constant of literature, is that no matter how bad the writing is, there's still one person out there who will buy into it. I need one book. I need someone to find me one book where everyone collectively is like, I don't want to play ball. Please tell me what book that is. So some people will buy into it. Other people will say that characters aren't behaving the way that their personality said they should. They say that really important things have suddenly become unimportant and meaningless. And some other people will say there are plot holes and this problem and that problem, that problem. I think I've never seen an episode of Game of Thrones, but I understand that they broke the Dragon Lady's narrative constants in such a way that the ending is now infamous for being very bad. That's all I know about Game of Thrones. Don't break your constants. They're there for a reason. So, as a writer, how do you avoid Dragon Lady, everyone getting mad? How do we avoid this problem? Just write all the questions that the readers might have, that you might have, the readers that you're posing as the writer, have an answer for all of them. Even if you never explicitly answer them, you should still have the answer because the world is operating like it has that answer. In Bird Box, we're never explicitly told what the monster is, how it gets there, why it gets there, what the limitations are. No one ever actually tells us anything about these monsters. We have to learn everything the hard way. But even so, it's very clear that the author, Josh Malerman, knows exactly what this monster is, all of its behaviors, how it got there, why it does the thing it does. Nothing about this monster feels very arbitrary. It feels like a beast, like a real creature, like a predator with behaviors and instincts. And in fact, Josh Malerman does not actually hide what the monster is. That's the best part. People will ask him, "What's the monster?" He'll just tell you. You can go ask him. He'll tell you. And then in the sequel book, Mallory, by the way, Bird Box was a book. It's a great book. Go watch the book. Go watch the book. Go read the book. And then go read the sequel, Mallory. The sequel, Mallory, was very good. And he basically confirms what the monster is in Mallory. I'm about to tell you what the monster is. It's seriously not gonna help you in any way, shape, or form. I don't feel like it's a spoiler because what it is, we don't actually get. It'll make sense, okay? So, you've been warned. All right, okay, we're ready. All right, the monster in Bird Box is infinity. I told you that the answer wasn't going to be very helpful. It doesn't explain anything. Well, it kind of does. There isn't enough space in the universe to truly process and comprehend infinity. So when the monster, like, why does it drive people insane? There are finite numbers, like tree 3, that are so big that it cannot be, there's not enough processing energy in the universe to compute that number. The universe would fall apart. So if we can't handle finite numbers, in the entirety of the universe, how is the human brain supposed to comprehend infinity? Right? That's why their brains shatter and they go crazy and, do the things that they do in that book. The monster in Bird Box has become sort of my classic example of non explicit narrative constants in a way that you can really see that the constants are there, that Josh Malerman really put a lot of work into it, but he never actually physically tells us what anything is. Except for, I just love that in interviews. They're like, "Oh, what is it?" And he goes, "Oh, infinity." What? So before the coffee gets cold, it's a very good example of narrative constants because the rules are literal. With time travel, you have to establish the ground rules in order for us to understand how we travel, right? My only holdup is that the way it was handled, more than once it's brought up that people don't know why it works, only simply that it does. I don't think we needed to bring that up more than once. So let's talk about these rules, and we'll revisit these rules again in the midsection because there are some problems, but for the sake of these are hard rules and them as a narrative constant, it's very good and it works very well. So here are the rules. Nothing you do in the past will alter the present. You can only go back and meet someone who has been in the coffee shop. Only one chair takes you back in time. You must sit in the chair during your entire visit into the past. You're given a fresh cup of coffee to take you into the past. You must drink it all before the coffee goes cold, or else you become a ghost which sits in the chair. The ghost gets up once a day to use the bathroom. Only then can you sit in the chair. If you force the ghost to move, she will curse you with paralysis. Kazu the waitress is the only person who can uncurse you by offering the ghost more coffee, which the ghost cannot refuse. You can go into the future, and you can only sit in the chair once. So these rules give us a framework to work with. All of the stories are told within these confines. And most importantly, almost none of these rules break. In fact, the only one that does break is that by the last story we learn that Mickey is the one who is now pouring the coffee for the ghost and helping people travel through time. It's not Kazu anymore. And I think in terms of narrative constants that have to break, that is one that makes the most sense because this coffee shop was established in I think 1874. So unless Kazu is immortal, which she's not because she's the cousin of Kay, like their family. I don't know, maybe she could have been immortal. I thought she might have been. That would have been great, but so we understand that obviously we have to pass down who pours the coffee. So that breakage, especially thematically, because this story is about inheritance and legacy and family and duty, and all of that stuff, it makes sense that the story ends with somebody taking the reins of pouring the coffee, that we're passing it down. All of these stories are really talking about the way that people connect with each other and the way that we try to hold our families together, from the lovers who are just trying to start, to the Alzheimer's, which is coming to an end, to, birth and death and accidents and tragedies. It's all about how does the family hold itself together. That's what the plot is. And part of that is passing down your trade to the next generation. So again, we can break narrative constants. I know I call them narrative constants, but we can break them. And in some points, you have to break them. They have to break. You can't have the world state stay the same and have a plot. Things have to change. So a constant in the Hunger Games, for example, is that the actual function of the Hunger Games itself is that it is a tool used to discourage the districts from rebelling. That is what the purpose of the Hunger Games is. That constant breaks the moment that Katniss and Peeta attempt to take the Night Block, because they have taken the games, this symbol of dominance, and then they have turned it into a symbol of defiance. And because the Hunger Games no longer is this symbol of dominance and has now become a symbol of defiance, this is what spirals the plot of Catching Fire out of control, because Snow changes the rules in order to kill Katniss, and it spirals out of control, and it spirals into the downfall of the Capitol and the end of the games. This broken constant changes the trajectory of the course of an entire country. It's very good. So, if nothing genuinely significant ever changes, we don't really have much of a story to tell. And, I'm talking. The Hunger Games is a very good example because it's very obvious and the stakes are very high, but this is also true for slice of life books. Little things have to change in order for something interesting to happen. It's part of the reason why I generally don't vibe with literary fiction, is because a lot of nothing happens. And for some people, they like those kinds of stories. I do not. I did not like Taipei. I did not like Beautiful World, Where Are You? They're just stories I just didn't vibe with. So back again about the narrative constants and these rules, they narrow us right to the theme. The only stories we can really tell with these rules are the ones about closure and determination and family and inheritance. The present cannot be changed by going back into the past, but the future is malleable. It's also, again, a very clever way to keep your cast small, since the time travel rules, 90% of people are just kind of disinterested in the time travel. This was a good way to keep the cast small and justify to keep the cast small. I would assume that a very small plate production put this together, and so when you have a small cast, you really have to get creative as to why you don't have a large cast. And I think that this was a very clever way to do it. This is true. It's easier to understand it in gaming, but it also is true for novels, that your limitations, if you can stylize them, you can get it to work. That's how you get away with games where you might not have all of the skills to do AAA motion, graphics and all of that stuff. You just stylize it, and people are more willing to buy into it. I love characters who are unapologetically a problem. Ghost is this woman of very few words who sits in the time travel chair reading a book. And once a day, she is allowed to go to the bathroom. She cannot refuse a cup of coffee. If someone tries to force her out of the chair, she can curse them with paralysis. Do you know how awesome it would be if women could just curse people with paralysis when they're getting pestered at a bar and just don't want anything to do with the person? Like, they show up and they're like, hey, let me buy you a drink, and they're like, no, and they go, but why? They touch them, boom, curse, you paralyzed. We would have world peace within a week. I want what this ghost is having. Let me be the ghost. Bring all the nice guys to this cafe. Let me teach them a lesson. So the ghost, basically, in terms of as a story mechanic, she serves as the consequence for staying in the past too long. If you stay in the past too long, when the coffee gets cold, you will be the ghost. It's your turn to be the ghost. Nobody in the story ever becomes the ghost. I thought that someone was going to become the ghost. I was kind of sad that it didn't, and I'm hoping that in one of the other 3 books that is written about this, that someone else becomes the ghost. We don't learn specifically about the ghost woman. We don't learn anything about her other than Kazu, the waitress who pours the coffee. She thinks that the ghost stayed too long because she was trying to talk to her dead husband, and we know that the book that she is reading is called The Lovers. So, as I said, as a plot device, she just kind of serves as an obstacle, and she does that job very well. She's the only character we never get a real insight to. We never get a look into her brain or a real insight into her thoughts and feelings, but her final actions in the book is what pushes us into the last plot of the short story and to the finality of the book itself. In the second short story, we learn that the ghost effectively has no agency. The only thing that she can do is that she can choose when to go up to go to the bathroom. That's the only choice that this woman has as the ghost. In short story 3, which is where we learn this, we learn that she can't refuse a cup of coffee, and so Kazu keeps offering her cups of coffee in order to fill her bladder so that she is forced to use the bathroom, and we see that she's very annoyed and feels very betrayed at Kazu for doing this. We can gather from that that the ghost is aware of the things that are going on. This is the first time that we see her sort of express an emotion and its frustration at being forced to use the bathroom at that time rather than at the time that she wants to do it. And in the last short story, Kay is very despondent about the fact that she is going to die in childbirth and the fact that she will never get to meet her daughter and that all she can do really is bring this daughter into the world, and the ghost makes the deliberate choice to stand up and go use the bathroom. And it's this moment where we slow down and we get a real insight, the closest thing we have to an insight of this ghost. This ghost is showing sympathy for Kay. Because of her mistakes, she is now forced to play the part of the ghost, but in this moment when the ghost hears of Kay's sadness, she makes the choice to allow Kay to sit in the seat, and thus we have to confront the humanity of this ghost, and we finally actually have to see her as a real person and not just an obstacle. And looking back, there is something to be said about this ghost's opinions on the other characters. With Fumiko, the girl who wants to fix her boyfriend's problems, and Hirai, who wants to make things right with her dead sister, the ghost is very apathetic to their problems. She doesn't seem to care. She seems fairly annoyed at both of them. And I think it's because Fumiko and Hirai have inherently selfish reasons to go back in time. They're going back to fix mistakes. Fumiko wants to go back to tell her boyfriend that she loves him and she wants him to stay because she should have the last time she was there, and Hirai wants to go back in time because she rebuked her sister and avoided her sister, but now her sister is dead and Hirai needs closure. They're going back to fix mistakes, and the ghost doesn't seem to care about that. But when Kotake contemplates her husband's disease affecting his memory and how she might end up having to live as his nurse, it's sort of seen as a coincidence that the ghost gets up to use the bathroom and there's just suddenly time for Kotake to go back in time. It's just seen as a sheer coincidence. But in the last story, when we finally confront the ghost's humanity and see her as a person who is making a deliberate act to go up and use the bathroom in order to give Kay a seat so that she can go and talk to her unborn daughter, we understand that this is the only choice that the ghost ever gets to make when she gets up to go, which means when she went to go use the bathroom and vacated the seat in Kotake's story, that was a deliberate choice, and thus it was also a deliberate choice for the ghost to not even care that Fumiko wanted to go back in time, and not really care that Hirai wanted to go back in time. So we can, retroactively interpret that coincidence as an intentional act of humanity. I take that to mean that the ghost is the thing that allows the time travel to occur if she is sort of casting judgment on the people who want to go back in time. It's like she can almost choose who sits there. Obviously, you can sit there and wait because in a 24-hour time period, she has to stand up. That's a rule. So you can wait it out. Fumiko does wait it out. But effectively, she also can just choose to get up whenever she wants. So if she gets up at the right time for someone, it's not a coincidence. She is basically passing judgment and saying, you're allowed to go back. I approve. I think the ghost empathizes with Kotake and Kei because they want one more moment to go back with their loved one. But they are also not the cause of this problem. You know, Kotake is not the reason why Fusagi's memory is going, and Kei isn't the reason why Miki doesn't have a mother. All we know about the ghost is that she lost her husband and sat in the chair to see him, and then she got lost in time. Kotake and Kei, they're not trying to fix a mistake. They are just trying to get a moment with the person that they love, and the ghost seems to approve of those kinds of reasons for going back in time. I think the ghost was the best part. She was this, like, mystery and everybody's favorite problem. What a legend. The only story I wish we could have gotten was the Ghost Woman's. I hope we see her again. I hope we get more information about her. I loved her. This is a really small detail, but if I am anything, I'm thorough. So with both interwoven short story collections and time travel, we need a way to ground us into reality so that way we don't feel like we are lost in time. Otherwise we'll feel, disjointed and that we don't really know when we are. This is not a difficult thing to do. There's plenty of ways to get around this. And a couple of examples is you can write the dates at the top of each section. Though I've learned as a fantasy author, the fantasy dates will not help. My beta readers got very lost. I'm very sorry. You can use landmarks, so something could happen before or after a major event that can ground us when we are. And then the last one, which is what most people do, and it's the easiest one to get away with, is that you can just tell us how much time has passed from the last major event in character. Someone can think it or say it. So before the coffee gets cold, in story 3, we have a time traveler sitting in a chair. That's where we start. So we don't actually know when we are if we're starting with someone in the chair. Did she go into the past and we are now in the past? Are we in our present? Where exactly are we? And then after she leaves and we get into the meat of the third story, which is about Kumi's death, one of the characters says, oh, but Kumi was here 3 days ago. Kumi, who visited that cafe in story 2, so we know that there are 3 days between story 2 and story 3, and thus we are grounded in time. We know when we are, and we understand that that time traveler at the very beginning came from the future, and it also canonically means that this present is that girl's past. It's very simple, but it's something that's absolutely necessary. It's something you wouldn't think of when you see that it's there, but it's something that you'll notice when it's not. This is another really small detail. There are 2 instances that Kawaguchi uses landmark descriptions in order to convey us information non-explicitly. This isn't something new or innovative or anything like that, but for educational purposes I wanted to point it out because this is something that you can use in your writing to help convey information in a non-explicit way. So the first time we get it is in story 3 when the time traveler visits from the future. The cook and owner, Nagari, is described as being large and intimidating. I presume he was an Armstrong in another life. And people get intimidated by how big he is, even though he's basically a softie who has a lot of passion for high quality ingredients. He's basically the muscular chef from Monster Hunter.
It's not you understand. It's me. I have standards.
Someone has to go shopping with him or he'll go over budget because he's just that dedicated. So, anyways, the time traveler is unbothered by Nagari's stature. And we can glean from this that she is not bothered by him because she's familiar with him. Strangers get easily intimidated by him because of the size, and she's not. Therefore, we can conclude that she knows him. And that helps support the idea and the later reveal that the time traveler is Mickey, who is his daughter from the future. That's why she's not bothered by him. That's her dad.
You are my dad. You're my dad. Woogie, woogie, woogie.
The second time is Goro, who is the boyfriend in story 1. He has this scar, and this is part of the reason why he thinks that he's sort of unworthy of Fumiko's love, because he doesn't think he's very beautiful, and he just thinks that she could do better. And he does this tick where he just kind of picks at his eyebrow, kind of like this. And he does it all the time in the first story. And then, when we get to the fourth story, where Kay goes into the future, she sees this guy, she's like, he has a burn scar, and at that point you might be like, is that Goro? And then when he starts picking at his eyebrow, you're like, oh, that is Goro. And the story does explicitly tell us that it's Goro. Obviously, we learn that Miki is Nagari's daughter, so it does eventually become explicit to us, but this kind of storytelling is very rewarding for someone like me who is, every time there is a mystery, I am clinging on to the details, trying to figure it out for myself, and it seems that Kawaguchi is aware of readers like me and added in a few little mysteries like that I could pounce on and chew on while the story is taking place, and it feels very rewarding to be correct. Even the smaller ones. Modernism is like the nerd who gets shoved into the locker by much more popular, more favorable literary genres. It's a very smart genre that's very intimidating because it's difficult to understand, and when done wrong, people hate it with a burning passion. The genre dominated between 1990 and 1940, really hitting its apex in post-World War I. Now, if you've been tracking dates, you might conclude that I don't read books between 1950 because of modernism. And you would be correct. This is exactly why I don't read books before 1950, because modernism is difficult to understand, and for me, it's not a fun difficult. I'm sorry, Professor Swanson, I am a minimalist girly. I just can't understand modernist writing. By myself, I've enjoyed Mrs. Dalloway, but I also had that story told in a school setting, so I had it explained to me. Here's a reading tip for people who are like me and they struggle with certain genres of books because they're just so difficult to understand. Maybe you're reading The Scarlet Letter, maybe you're reading Mrs. Dalloway. You can read the spark notes before you read the chapter, so that way you know the main story beats before you go into the very complicated text. That's what SparkNotes originally was for. It's a tool that you're supposed to use with the novel, not to replace the novel. Again, this is, if you don't want to cheat, I guess you could just go read the Sparks notes, but I don't like cheating. I learned this in high school when we were at the Scarlet Letter. They said you read the Spark Notes, then you read the chapter, and that's what I did. And I loved the Scarlet Letter. Same way that I love Mrs. Dalloway, which I also did this for Mrs. Dalloway in college because I just could not understand what was going on. And if your teacher gets mad at you, you're doing extra work to understand what is going on. Why would they punish you for that? You shouldn't be punished for not being able to understand something. I love Mrs. Dalloway and the Scarlet Letter. They're two of some of my favorite books, and I only got to say that through access via SparkNotes. So there's your reading tip of the day for books that are very, very difficult. I did end up going to SparkNotes for The God of Small Things, and I still don't understand really what was going on there. So modernism characteristics are effectively a rebellion from Romanticism and the traditional storytelling and formulaic verses. This is according to the University of Toledo. The focus was on individualism, experimentation, symbolism, absurdity, and formalism. Basically, World War I happened, and the writing world said, life is short to spend our entire life drawing in the lines. That's effectively what modernism is. No more coloring in the lines. Now, Before the Coffee Gets Cold is not a modernist story, okay? The most rebellious thing it does for an American audience is that it has time travel, which is genre fiction, which English literature has a love-hate relationship with. But Japanese literature welcomes a touch of the supernatural, so this book tracks for something that modernists would be rebelling against. Why am I here talking about modernism? You might be thinking, asking, begging me to know why I've chosen to talk about modernism of all things. We just talked about minimalism. Why do we have to talk about modernism? A lot of ideas that modernism produced are very cool, and I have come to love certain books that borrow from modernism more than I love modernism itself. The wandering eye of modernism is one of those things. So the wandering eye or third person omniscient, it doesn't specifically belong to modernism, but it is certainly a staple of it. When it fails, we call it head hopping. That's when we hop from perspective to perspective, from paragraph to paragraph, or even from sentence to sentence. We're switching whose head we're in. And even when the wandering eye of modernism succeeds, people will still call it head hopping. It's one of those things that people just don't really like in writing. Some people it's fine, other people don't like it. Normally, head hopping is a problem when we're shifting from third person omniscient to third person ventriloquism, which third person ventriloquism is using the intimacy of first person in the third person. George Saunders, 10th of December guy, he is the person who kind of was like known for third person ventriloquism. So technically, third person omniscient gets a pass as like a stylistic approach on perspective, which is third person omniscient is the wandering eye of modernism. But you still have people call it head hopping. Like I said, people shove modernism in the locker for being such a nerd. Like, oh, you're stylized, locker. Another thing that modernism can be characterized, and this is where it loses a lot of people, is fragmentation and jarring transitions between time and perspective. It is all about irregularities, and that is why sometimes modernism can be very hard to understand at a technical level. So the wandering eye, effectively, it just goes into somebody's head for a while and peers in, and then it wanders and it goes into somebody else's, and it's just this eye that is looking at everyone and is going into them, and we are sort of given the perspective of an omniscient God, really getting to know the complexities of these characters' lives as this eye wanders around watching everyone.
You can make a religion out of this.
This wandering eye forces us to sonder, which is to confront the idea that every human being, even strangers on the street, have incredibly complex lives, as complex as our own. So when we wander into someone with this eye, we are forced to confront their complex human experience. And then when we wander into someone else, we have to confront their complex human experience. It's overwhelming. It can be very overwhelming. It's effectively what happens in Mrs. Dalloway, is that we wander into somebody's headspace and we dive headfirst into all of their trauma and all of their problems and all of the things that they feel, and then we go and do that to somebody else.
Are you kidding? This is a joke. You need to let it go. You're stronger with those daddy issues. Oh, thank you.
And then somehow we have to remember that there's a party happening. You're not reading that for plot. You are reading with the wandering eye. You're reading it to get lost in the human experience. And then we just go wander into somebody else. So I bring all of this up because our point of view isn't just a third person omniscient. It really is this wandering eye of modernism. We are slipping between perspectives, between paragraphs and sentences, getting a feel for everyone in the room as events are unfolding, except for the ghost. We never go into the mind of the ghost. I'm mad that we don't go into the mind of the ghost. I want to know about my favorite problem. What is she thinking right now? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much does she hate Hirai? This was good work, in my opinion. I can see why people call it head hopping. I can see why other people wouldn't bite. For a novel like this, the execution right at the beginning struggled. That's why we're in the midsection for this, because The Wandering Eye was good, but it did trip at the starting line. Oh, where's Mrs. Dalloway? I should probably put the 10th of December back on. Do I know where this book is off the top of my head? So Mrs. Dalloway dives us headfirst into the wandering eye of modernism, right? We don't spend any time setting it up. We are there immediately. Yeah, they write a timeline so you can keep track. It doesn't help. Another introduction. Here we go. This is how much is just trying to get you ready for this novel. Okay. This is how Mrs. Dalloway begins. Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself, for Lucy had her work cut out for her. The doors would be taken off the hinges. Rumpelmayer's men were coming, and then, thought Clarissa Dalloway, what a morning, fresh as if issued to children on a beach. The first sentence is from Lucy's perspective. Lucy is saying Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself because Clarissa calls herself Clarissa. So Clarissa wouldn't call herself Mrs. Dalloway. That's how we know that the first sentence is told from the perspective of Lucy, and then in the second sentence, we are being told from the perspective of Clarissa Dalloway. So, like I said, we spend no time getting confused in Mrs. Dalloway. We are there right from the get-go. So before the coffee gets cold, it starts in a cold open. In that, not a cold open in the way that we traditionally understand a cold opening, which is sort of an introduction to the story that has nothing to do with whatever is going on. Cold open in the idea that stylistically, this first section stylistically has nothing to do with the rest of the story. The rest of the story is told stylistically in a different way. We're given the short scene of the breakup between Fumiko and Goro in the cafe. Now, this is a tangent. I know I blasted the locked door for what felt like a theft of the breakup scene from Legally Blonde, but I will defend the opener here, which is a public breakup scene, because Fumiko thinks she's getting proposed to, like, once. She's not convinced that it's happening. The rest of the time she refers to it simply as a surprise. And Fumiko, she does buy, like, a special outfit, like Elle does in Legally Blonde. I think I had more buy-in for this because once we get into the details, it feels more distinct. You know, we're not in a fancy restaurant, they're not college age, she actually bought the dress, unlike Elle, who didn't buy the dress. In the locked door, it's so unimaginative and vague, it's difficult not to see the Legally Blonde influence. Though, I mean, if Rita McFadden came out and said that she never saw the movie, I would believe her. Like, I don't know for sure. But, you know, details are how cliches and tropes evolve into something profound. When you do not add flesh to the bone, people aren't always entertained. It feels cheap, and that's why I think the public breakup works and Before the Coffee Gets Cold and doesn't work in the locked door. Okay, tangent aside. The breakup is their opener. And then, after we do this breakup, which is basically this straight from Fumiko's perspective, we go into the first real scene, and that's technically where the wandering eye starts. Its establishment is very jarring and unnatural, as it is in most modernism novels, except for this novel wasn't written as a modernist novel, it's minimalist, so it's even more jarring and even more confusing. Because at least in a modernism novel, like written in the modernist style completely, there's buy-in, you understand what they're doing. This is not doing that. For the first time, we really notice the wandering eye. We are firmly planted in Fumiko's brain. We are strapped on the Cyclone roller coaster, ready for us to stay on the Fumiko brain tracks. And then Fumiko passes out, or at least she becomes non-responsive, due to sadness or something like that. And we don't get an end scene pick back up when Fumiko wakes up. The scene keeps going, and we're introduced to the wandering eye, but because we've been on Fumiko's roller coaster brain tracks for so long, it feels like the front axle is broken, and now the roller coaster is falling, and we're hurtling straight for uranium.
What a load of freaking junk, that crusty turning clearly drunk, so that people everything they've got.
Go watch Ride the Cyclone. Once we get past that point, the wandering eye is smooth and simple. The book is still minimalist, and the borrowing of the wandering eye is not entirely overwhelming. It just stutters right at the beginning, because we spend too much time in Fumiko's head, and like I said with Mrs. Dalloway, we get a perspective change at the second sentence, establishing the wandering eye. I think he just should have had the wandering eye right out the gate. It's gonna be jarring no matter what. No matter what, to get the wandering eye started, it's gonna be jarring, but you know, we can get to a place where it's a good jarring and not an uncomfortable jarring. So the actual time travel rules work pretty well. They generate some very good storytelling. However, the rules are not all explained right away, and they only come out when they're relevant to the story. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. The reveal that the ghost cannot refuse a cup of coffee in the third story works. That one is fine. There is no natural way of explaining that without showing it, because story 1 is with Fumiko. She is new to the cafe, she doesn't know the rules, and we have no reason to tell her the ghost's rules. With that one not getting revealed later in the story itself, that one's fine. There are some rules that are more dubious in their late reveal, which is you can go into the future, you can only sit in the chair once. The one sit per person rule was dumb to hold off. There's no reason not to tell us right away. It would have been more impact if we knew that these people going back in time, these are their only moments, especially with regulars and staff members, Why haven't they been doing this all the time? Don't you think they would be doing it out of curiosity? But if you learn very early on that they only do it once, then we have this added layer of tension, which is, I can only go once. Is this really what I want to spend it on? There's some tension generated there that we've lost because you decided to wait too long to tell us that that was a rule. We're going to talk about the second rule about the future, and we're also just going to transition to talk about why going into the future was sort of subpar. These kind of go together. When I initially read it, I bought Into the Future in story 4, but objectively, I can see how this was a deal breaker for some people. I can only guess that, 5-star reviews got nicked down to 4 stars once we got to the 4th story, because the 4th story is controversial, very controversial. But let's talk about the 4th story and how it sort of breaks down the world logic and then accidentally contradicts the moral that Kawaguchi was trying to get at us with. In the moral of Before the Coffee Gets Cold is that you can't change the present by changing the past, but you can be given a new perspective which can then change your future. Except not, because this book lets you go into the future, which means the future isn't malleable. So when changes are made in the past, those are real changes. It just doesn't change anything in the present. But story 3, we get a visitor from the future, which means the present that the story takes place in is canonically the past of that girl's time. Until, in the real world right now with you and me, until we have tangible proof, we have no reason to believe that the future exists. Until proven wrong, we're at the edge of time with nothing in front of us. For you and me, the future is whatever we make of it. But now that a girl has shown up from the future in Before the Coffee Gets Cold, that means the present is actually the past. And the future isn't malleable. It's hard determination. Everything will happen according to fate, and we can't change the outcome. Going into the future would make you keenly aware of all the things you cannot change. So the message of the novel gets lost the moment that future travel becomes possible and the moment that you acknowledge that this present is somebody else's past. I thought the daughter coming back for the photo of her dead mom was cool. I bought into the parts, but it really does rupture the theme and probably should have been taken out. Time travel is hard. And I can be a little more forgiving because you really need to think of everything in order for it to work. It's just that last story where we hiccuped. But again, I was really, by that time I was really into the novel, right? So I didn't necessarily mind the fact that that's the direction that we went. I didn't really know where to put this because this wasn't so much as that you sort of got away with it or you didn't get away with it. It was just kind of like a missed opportunity. One of those little threads that by the time we got to the end, I wasn't sure why it was included in the first place. Because, of course, I would notice all of the little details that you decided to just kind of not acknowledge, Kawaguchi. If I am anything, I am thorough. In university, there was a student who wrote a story and they said that it took place in this state and that there were a blueberry farm, and I researched to see if there was blueberries could grow in that climate because accuracy was very important to me. And of course, these were student writers, and I'm like, you want to be accurate so that way we're not spreading misinformation for the sake of a good story. But yeah, I'm thorough. I'm paying attention to everything. This is how I read every story. You might wonder, how does she have fun reading? I don't know. This is just what I do. And now I'm doing it and putting it on the internet for no one else to see because I am manic and I need other people to look at stories the way that I look at them because I feel crazy. Anyways, the one detail, this one little thing that you put in there that you never acknowledged, that nobody's talking about, is the name of this cafe. The coffee shop is named Funiculi Funicula, which is mentioned by two of our time travelers as a song they recall from their childhood. And only Katake, the nurse of the story, gives us the detail that it's about climbing a volcano. I thought that all four of our time travelers would mention the song. It might have been a connection point. Maybe that the people who have heard the song are the people who end up in the coffee shop and they are fated to travel back in time. Why? I don't know. But I was willing to buy into that. But again, only two of our time travelers acknowledged the song. And you could assume that perhaps Hirai and Kei also know what the song is, especially because Kei is the co-owner, but it's never explicitly stated the way that Kotake and Fumiko explicitly state that they know the song from their childhood. And this brings up more questions than answers. Because if you don't know anything about this song, let me get closer. If you don't know anything about this song, like I didn't, it sounds like it could be Japanese words, funiculi, funicular. And you would just go about your day, right? But if you're from Naples, Italy, or you don't live under a rock like I do, you would know that funiculi funicula is actually Neapolitan, not Japanese. Neapolitan is a Romance language. It's sort of a neighbor to the Italian language. And that quirky little volcano that this song is singing about is Mount fucking Vesuvius. The volcano that destroyed Pompeii. And also, it destroyed the funicular railway that the song is singing about. This was like a railway that carted passengers up and down the volcano, and it was destroyed by the volcano because it's a fucking volcano. An active fucking volcano. Why is this cozy coffee shop, which is the story about taking control of our future, why is it named after a song sung about one of the most dangerous places to live in the world? Because it is one of the most dangerous places to live in the world because it's near an active volcano. What? There's also a time problem here, which is that the coffee shop opened up in 1874 with this name, but the song wasn't composed until 1880 when the funicular line opened up. Like I said, I Googled the details. It's in the blueberries. So the dates are a little mixed up here. There's no explanation for that. And there's no explanation why this underground basement coffee shop in Tokyo, Japan would name itself after this song. And this song is basically a marketing song for this funicular railway. This is sort of like if a Vietnamese tea house in the year 2190 decided to name itself Whopper after the Burger King Whopper song that went viral on TikTok in the year of our Lord 2023. That's what that is. That's the equivalent. It's a marketing song. I have so many questions and not a single answer. And thus, I have two expectations going into the next three novels as I want to know about Ghost Lady. I need to know about Ghost Lady. And also why the coffee shop is named after a song about Mount Vesuvius. Vesuvius! I was very entertained by this book and I rated it 5 stars. At first, this section of the things that it didn't get away with, I didn't have anything written here. And so I decided to go look at Goodreads reviews and Storygraph to give you sort of an accurate critique of what the other side of the aisle sort of thinks about this book, the people who didn't like it. I wanted to give you a well-rounded sort of viewscope. But after sitting with it and sort of reading these criticisms, I realized that I do have sort of something to say about things it didn't get away with. And first we're going to talk about the last story, what it didn't get away with, and that is the concept of the martyred mother. So a major criticism of the book is effectively a reflection of our modern sentimentality about women's reproductive health. YouTube censorship is a nightmare, right? So I'm about to use a euphemism to get around it. So I need everyone to pull out your Bibles to Exodus 12:29. We're going to be talking about the 10th plague to pre-existing little ones. Alright? 10th plague to pre-existing little ones. You understand what I mean? Good. Okay. So, what women are very tired of, both in America and Japan, are stories about mothers sacrificially dying during childbirth when a 10th plague to a pre-existing little one is a viable option. It's an incredibly difficult choice for any person to ever make because there's no morally correct option. And there's no objectively better option. All we have are simply options, and all we can do is make them. Each person carrying a little one has to make this choice, and they always make the correct choice because that choice is correct for them. But we live in an era where politicians everywhere are trying really hard to render a 10th plague to a little one as something inherently immoral, right? So stories that have martyred mothers in this immaculate light have a bad aftertaste. It's just not a story women want to read. You can still write it. No intelligent individual will accept censorship for the sake of comfort, but you hit publish knowing the era that you're writing in and knowing how people might react. Again, it's all just choices. And if you're fine with this criticism, then go ahead. But you can't get mad. And that I'm not saying that Kawaguchi is getting mad, but I just want to say, like, you can't get mad that this is a criticism that you have. You wrote this story in this era knowing how people feel about reproductive health. And again, I have no idea how Kawaguchi is reacting to these criticisms. I hope that he is taking them, well, that he's not being cruel about it. So the fourth story, just a quick recap, is that Kay, the coffee shop co-owner, she's pregnant. She has a heart condition, and because of this heart condition, she is going to die during pregnancy. And so instead of considering other options, she decides to have the baby anyways, knowing that she's going to die, and it's her turn to sit in the time traveler's seat. She goes in the future to talk with her daughter, right? So I am someone who has a high risk of death during pregnancy because of my medical conditions, so I understand Kay a lot on a lot more of an intimate level. And let me tell you, I have no plans on dying. My abdominal and pelvic floor muscle, they don't contract correctly. The muscles that need to work correctly to just carry the baby. But then also, who knows, the fact that they sporadically don't work could cause childbirth complications, both natural and C-section. I was 14 years old when the doctor said, for your safety, it's just better, it's just safer if you just don't have kids. As the kind of person that Kawaguchi is writing about, I wasn't necessarily disturbed by it at first, but now as I've had time to sit and think about the story, I can say I'm not sure how realistic Kay's actions are. As someone in her position, I'm not taking the risk because I have a lot to live for. I'm young and I have so much to see and learn and grow. Why would I throw that all away for a hypothetical child I might never get to meet? For a large portion of people in the world, pregnancy is a beginning. You're starting your families and you're getting to imagine first words and first steps, and you get to live in that growing process. There's so much love that comes with childbearing. So it can be hard sometimes to contextualize that for me it's a death sentence. I don't get to imagine the baby shower in the first day of school. There's a high chance I might not be there for it. It's not a beginning for me, it's an end. And why would you bring a child into this world knowing that? Especially when there are so many other viable options out there for you. I think maybe the fourth story didn't bother me as much at first is because Kay is fictional. She is not a fully realized person with agency, so her choices don't matter in an existential sense because it's not real. And I think because the rest of the story, the entire book worked so well for me, I was more forgiving on its more controversial sections. So the easiest way to sort of get around this is to take out her heart condition. Some women die during childbirth, and because of the rules of time travel, there's nothing Kay could do to change the fact that she died in childbirth. Because the daughter Mickey went back in time to get the picture with her mother, so it's all set in stone. Kay is going to die no matter what. You could also move this into the background. I knew before we actually got into the fourth story that Mickey was the daughter of Kay, and Kay was going to die in childbirth because Mickey went back in time for the photo. Why would you go back in time and take a photo with someone unless you don't have a photo to begin with? So you could just keep all of that in the background and write an entirely new fourth story and just leave that as sort of like an inferential reward for the people who are paying attention to the rules and lore of the story. Of course, no matter what you do, people are still going to criticize it for representing a martyred mother. The only way to get rid of that criticism is to just take out the story entirely. But again, no intelligent person would take censorship over comfort, so I'm not necessarily suggesting that. I'm just suggesting ways that it could become more palatable to a wider audience. Okay, so I've gone to Goodreads and Storygraph to construct a cohesive criticism because, as I said, I originally did not have anything to say in the what they didn't get away with section. This is all public information you can find on your own. I'm just collecting it here. And I don't want anyone to get harassed, so I haven't listed anybody's names. I just kind of did a sort of thorough research among reviews. So we've already talked about the criticisms about the representation of reproductive health. Secondly, this book, people say that this feels like it was better for a TV series or is better to be a play. This was adapted from a play, so that is probably why for some people this screams like the book format doesn't seem quite correct for this kind of story. A lot of criticisms on the minimalism felt like it was tell more than show. I didn't mind it, but as we've already established, I'm really bad at noticing telling not showing. I think I just have a lot of buy-in. Some people thought it was repetitive, and this repetition is really what got on their nerves. A lot of people actually were like, the constant repeating was getting on their nerves. I can see it. I've bought into it more because I'm a minimalist girly, and I accept that when you're doing a short story format, you might be hearing the same things over and over again because in a short story format, you have to assume that the reader has not read the short story before it, so you have to reestablish things. So this just seems like people were not vibing with the minimalism and not vibing with the short story format. They didn't think that Kawaguchi really got away with it. Some found it incredibly conservative. The gender roles felt forced. It feels like women are giving up their lives and freedoms for the sake of their families or the men in their lives. And I think that's where like American and Japanese culture really clash with each other because American culture is very obsessed with individualism, and this feels like it is the death of the individual. And I'm not saying that like Japanese culture believes in the death of the individual. I'm just saying in an American context, I can see why Americans would have problems with this because this book can sometimes feel like the death of the individual. Because this really is about family and the collective unit and the togetherness of everything. And then last but not least, this was kind of my favorite. Someone said that it was unbearably sentimental. And I think that's valid. And just as valid as everything else that everyone had to say about this book. Like I said, books aren't good or bad. Everyone just has tastes and everyone has buy-ins to different qualities of books. I rated this 5 stars. On Goodreads it has a 3.7 and it has a 3.8 on Storygraph. Even though I sort of came to terms with the fact that I wasn't as in love with the last story as I initially was, I still am keeping the 5-star rating because I had a fun time reading it again. I'm a very easy reader to please, actually. I 5-star most of my books. I think this and The Cartographers are probably my most controversial 5-star ratings. I couldn't find a book review on YouTube that was very critical of this. Everyone on YouTube seems to very much love this novel. I would have loved to link someone so that you could have watched a perspective of someone who didn't like this novel. So I hope that the criticism section that I have is enough to give you a window into how people thought negatively of this book. I would recommend this book because I had a great time. I loved reading it. All the same, I understand if this is not something that you want to touch. I will end up reading the rest of the series. We'll see how it turns out. I'm not sure that this premise can be sustained for 4 novels, but I could be wrong. Please tell me what you think in the comments. Be respectful, be kind, and be ready for the next video coming out to a YouTube near you.